Hello, everybody. I'm Abir Shanawi.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Doug Handy. Welcome to Real Talk, our space.
There's always a lag.
Always got to be a nice pause just to
Always has to,
make sure Abir is ready to go for the
Oh,
evening.
yeah. It's always my fault, right? Okay. Thanks a
I'm
lot.
just saying, hey, the things I
Sure.
do for my co-host, right?
Okay. Things you do for the people. So we're continuing our sessions for this month's theme, which is Maryland Stories or America in Miniature. And our topic today will be art at the Hampton Plantation, or people know it as the Hampton House. And sorry about that. Hampton House, and we're talking about art, and we have some very amazing guests.
We do. They're amazing indeed. Folks that I have the pleasure of working with in my day job, one of them in particular, we probably get a chance to interact probably on a daily basis just to make sure everything is going in the direction it should be going. And the other, anytime we get a chance to connect, it's always a good thing, right? We talk about people that energize me and people that drain me. He's definitely an energizer. So really glad to have two of my favorite educators and all around favorite people join us here this evening.
I agree.
And
I agree.
always subscribe, right? You can never say subscribe too much to our channel.
No. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Real Talk Our Space. And we always like comments or even ideas from our audience. So you can also either drop a line in our comment section or send us an email at realtalkourspace@gmail.com. So I'm hoping today we'll get a really good conversation going because, again, we're talking about the Hampton Plantation. And how can kids learn, especially when we're talking about art, and how are you going to recreate things that have such deep historical connections, but also can bring about a lot of emotions.
Right.
So I'm
And
excited
I
about
mentioned,
today's audience. Go ahead.
yes, Abir, so to say, and I know last week when we signed off, I mentioned that just a little, some facts about about Hampton. And that mansion we talked about, once possibly the largest private home in America by 1790.
Wow.
The Hampton Mansion serves as a grand example of late Georgian architecture in America. And then for those that go a little deeper, there's a story there about the estate or the plantation, if you will, and the enslaved African Americans who lived on, and I say lived, but they, existed as slaves on that site. And the fact that this is right here in our backyard, in Baltimore County, and it is a National Historic Site. And then, like I said, we have these wonderful educators and artists who can share some more experiences about that. So
I agree. Yep. And I actually live like down the street from the Hampton Plantation. So to put it in perspective, where I live was part of the estate of the Hampton family. So this might have been, where some of these enslaved, and we're honoring the ancestors of those who lived on the plantation and worked. So, I'm honoring them if I'm on their ground, just honoring their presence and the ancestors that came from there. Yep, so without further ado.
Ready for some guests?
Yes, we are.
All right. First, they'll be out at the same time, but first guest is Sherri Fisher. She's the Visual Arts Coordinator for Baltimore County Public Schools. She's a native Baltimorean, like myself. She believes in the power of art to transform lives, that art is a human right, and also that art makes everything awesome. Sherri is a two-time Fulbright scholar conducting arts-based research on classroom culture in Peru in 2012 and Finland in 2015. Additionally, she is the president-elect for the Maryland Art Education Association, or MAEA, and she was named the 2019 Eastern Region Supervision Administration Art Educator by the National Art Education Association, or NAEA. So we're very excited to have Sherri join us this evening.
Very impressive. And when I read all of our guest bios, I feel so small. So now we have Vernon Fains, who I would like to consider a dear friend. I've known him for quite some time. I've always in awe of him. He's a middle school art teacher who is also heavily involved in the Very Special Arts Festival, which is an annual festival in Baltimore County serving students with special needs. Vernon also serves as a mentor to emerging and aspiring educators in several ways, including as an adjunct professor at Towson University's Art Education Department. Among his many awards, Vernon was awarded the Maryland Art Education Association, or MAEA, Linda Pop Leadership Award for 2019. Vernon has recently taken on the role with MAEA as VP of Advocacy. He is involved in many state and national organizations advocating for teachers and students. And Vernon believes the arts play a valuable role in the lives of young people, as it did in his own life, developing creative minds and memorable experiences in our schools and our communities. So, are we ready for our guest, Douglas?
Yes, we are ready
All
for our
right.
guest of beer.
We have Sherri and Vernon. Hello, welcome.
Welcome, welcome.
Good to see you
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you for being on
Good
our
to see
show.
you too. Thank you for
Yes.
joining us.
And for audience members, just to know, we all know each other. We love each other. We have a great time together. So it makes our show even a lot more fun when we're with people that we already know, because you kind of get everything else out of the way. So let's begin.
Right. Yes, let's. So this first question actually comes from some discussions that Abir and I have had, and it's amazingly I haven't had the discussion with the two art educators who I have interacted with, but. Is it true? Is everyone really an artist? And what about those, not telling on anyone, but what about
That's
those
me.
who struggle?
I'm throwing myself out there.
What about those who struggle to make art? Like people who sit in canoes and.
I'm not an artist.
Do their best to use watercolors. So,
Seriously, I can't draw stick figures.
right. So
Nobody needs to draw stick figures, so you're all right, so.
But can't go wrong with drawing stick figures. That's my point.
Yeah.
Like if you botch stick figures on that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, Vernon and I might have very different views on this. I don't think everyone's an artist, because I think to say you're an artist is like to self-identify as an artist. I do think art is for everyone. And I do think, that everyone has the capacity to be an artist, but I don't know that everyone is an artist. And I think at some point you either sort of define yourself as one or not. And that plays a big role in it. And that doesn't mean you can't still love art, if you're not,
right.
But I do think there's something about self-identification there that has a big role in it. And I think, I feel like middle school is kind of when kids start to like decide that. So Vernon, you might know something.
So, surprisingly, I actually disagree. Short answer is yes, but
okay.
I always go back to who sets that criteria for what makes an artist. So I think about that. I think of expression and creative expression as an innate quality. I think it's within all of us. It's fundamental to the human experience.
Okay.
And I always think about the writer, author Ellen DeSanayake, who talks about making something special. And I think that goes a long way in any type of expression, whether it's functional or whether it's considered art. So it also includes not only just objects, but behaviors. So I see it a little bit different. And Sherri, you said earlier that art is a human right.
Yeah.
And I think anytime you express that right, whether it's good, whether it's a stick figure or not, you have made some form of art. I also want to think about how, when you talked about struggling with making art, I think about the struggle in a different way. It's part of the art making process for me. So I think it's when we teach ourselves that the struggle is okay, and that if we value the experience and the process over the product, then I think we can enjoy making art a little bit better. I think when we lose our way when we focus on making something instead of focusing on the experience and the process.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that make us do that, right? Like we go to museums, you see the finished stuff. You don't see the stuff you don't see the ugly canoe paintings, right? But
I don't know where that came from, but okay.
but I mean, I think that's part of it, right? There's a lot that's been put in place to like make art look magical. Yeah. And I think it's magical the whole way through. I don't think it's only magical at the end, but
See, coming from a non-art person, I'm sorry, but there's nothing magical about going through that process. I'm so frustrated. I'm so annoyed. I'm like, I just want to finish, and then I give up. So.
But I think that's part of the magic, right? So we the three of us, right? We did go in this it was last summer, I guess, or the end of the school year, and we had this chance to go out in canoes and make art. And
that's where the canoe reference comes from.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You
I'm
can come
wondering. I'm
next
like,
time of year.
where's the canoe thing?
Yeah.
I'm like,
It was
I'm
a
afraid of
wonderful
water,
experience.
so I don't know if I will, but okay.
You have to come with us next time.
Okay.
Yes, that's a must. But my big takeaway was the whole experience. I admit what I had as a product, but the experience, it was amazing. And going into that experience, I knew the goal was to make art. You know what I'm saying? And every part of that process was wonderful. So.
And you did. You made art,
Yeah,
you know, and like, so, you know, so I think that's, a lot of it is like setting up the conditions to make art, which, and those can be anything, but like some of that, like Vernon was saying, some of that's mindset, you know, and.
Yeah. And I agree. I think a lot of it is mindset. And when we talk about mindful art making, when you start the process and you're so focused on being in the present and just doing something, you kind of lose yourself in the experience and forget about the ultimate goal of making something and just do it.
Sounds like a Nike ad right there, but I'm thinking it also sounds like, okay, for me, I may not be artistic and say the traditional sense, but I lose myself when I'm cooking. Okay. I love to cook. I love to put dishes together. But then I think about my younger sister who, you know, we didn't grow up, you know, very artsy family or anything like that. But like she does amazing things with interior design. She's not an interior designer either, but she could come to my house and say, well, you should put that there and you should use this color scheme. And I would never have thought of it. So I kind of think, could it be that people are so born with it? Like it's an innate thing as opposed to something that's learned?
I think it's, maybe you could have like a more inclined, right?
Okay.
Like, you know, but I don't think, I think it is really, I mean, I don't think Vernon and I would have jobs if you couldn't learn it, right? but I think, but I think everyone can learn it, right? I think but I think it's just kind of like any other type of learning. Some people just start a little faster. They've got a little more gas in the engine, you know, for whatever reason, you know.
Yeah, and practice makes progress. You know, the more you do it, the more things you pick up, the more things you learn, the more skills you gain.
I like that. I like that. Practice makes progress and the skills that you gain. So.
Yeah, dropping gems from the top. How about we got some comments? So we've got some energized.
Yes.
I was about to say, Shane, another fellow art educator. Shane, good to see you with us this evening. And Shane has said this early, but it sounds like we kind of worked into this whole point, right? That there are so many ways to process art, and you know, Bear, the culinary arts. Right? You talked about your gift, you know, with food, and
it's
Julia's in agreement with. Yes. Good to see Julia.
Hello, Jennifer Stowe.
Jennifer Stowe. So we have a lot of friends and colleagues this evening.
Yeah, but she, you know, the message of the struggle in the process. It's true. I think, you know, it also takes a lot of patience. And then Julia says, you know, showing the process with the final product. It's a good way. And I think that's true. It's like, I think it's true of anything where people are like, "Ooh, I want to be like," for example, that basketball player, but they don't know how many times they probably failed or they probably, you know, got cut from teams until they got to the process to the final product. We also have Jody. Hi, Jody. Yes, the iceberg concept. We want to see the peak, but don't see all the work under the surface. And Mr. George Miller. Connected to 3 of the panelists.
That's pretty good, right? Aggie pride, always good to see a fellow Aggie. That's what I'm saying.
There you go. So, and he said I worked with his wife, George Miller. Okay, we'll get back to that one.
I was about to say, George. Now you got a beer's mind for the rest of the.
Hold on, is that Kalisha Miller's husband?
Yes.
Ah, got it. Hello, Mr. There you go.
That's not just me, Aggie. Yes.
Yeah, the deep talk about art. I never thought of
Yes.
I never thought of doodles as art. And I know an artist that I follow on Twitter who does amazing doodle art. Amazing doodle art. So no, it's great. So speaking of art and teaching, do you think that art can be taught in all cross-curricular content areas? I know, Sherri, you and I have worked with some social studies projects, but let's think about, I don't know, science or math, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things, this is always one of the, I remember kind of the early sort of art education lessons I think really embraced was that like, art's kind of where you come to do stuff with your learning. Like, it's kind of that place where you bring it all in and you kind of like lay it all out and then figure out what you're going to do with it. So that like you really can't. I mean, it's an investigative process, right? And so you've got to you've got to have content to dig into, to then respond to, react to, move forward with. So for myself, I wouldn't have made it through any education if I didn't kind of have art right there, and I had math teachers that didn't love me drawing things in there, but I won. And so, but like that's kind of, I don't know. That like I would have just not done school. Like I would have, what I mean? It would have just been like, so so that, I think that for a lot of kids, that's really a huge part of how they unpack knowledge.
Correct.
And I think it really allows for you to process in a way that is not necessarily verbally based. It's like, and that's so huge for so many different students, and so many, like things just cook at a different pace, and sometimes you can really get to some understanding through doing something with some content, whatever that may be. There's sort of some openness about art that allows it to make space for lots of different kind of ideas. I can't think of anything you couldn't put art into.
Okay.
I tend to agree. There's so many connections you can make. Of course, I see the obvious connections with social studies and looking at history, of course. And then there's the obvious connection with literacy of all types. Just focusing on teaching students how to read art. Noticing the elements and principles and understanding the direct connections to textual literacy is so important. And one of the classes I teach at Towson University deals directly with that, looking at the art and children's books and picture books.
Interesting. Okay.
And using that to understand and to teach art. There's just so many connections, even with math. When you think about creating something that's accurate and using measurement and using proportion, there's just so many connections. What I don't want people to do is to devalue art in trying to bring it into the classroom that's in a different content area.
Can you give an example, Vernon? What do you mean by valuing art if you do that?
An example, like when it's in service?
Yeah, an example is possibly using a content area, using art as something in the toolbox, a toolbox strategy to pull out whenever you want a child to express themselves visually in a different content area. I would rather see some co-teaching going on.
I see. Okay.
To make it a valuable experience all around, a more holistic experience for the
And we'd have better posters, right? If there was some co-teaching. But I think that's like what happens, right?
Great
it's like, oh, we've got the markers. We're going to do some art there. That's not that. You know what I mean? Like there isn't. And so, but there's more opportunities for those really authentic arts integration moments.
Yes.
And that's a lot, like, we talked about the canoe. That's what that was. It was connecting with Outdoor Science Office on how do we use some of the same language around looking and observing, to better understand our physical world. And
yes.
Well, sorry, I'm just like going back to what you said, Vernon, about the coat. Like when I was in the classroom, like I said, not really artistically inclined, but like Sherri said, I had a lot of students who love to use art to express themselves. I never thought of co-teaching. Like I would ask art teachers for ideas or something, or they would do it in their classroom and when it was art, but not to co-teach. I love that. So teachers out there, if you're listening, that's a wonderful way of doing cross-curricular at the same time. So thank you, Vernon, for pointing that out. But wow, I'm sorry, I'm just like marinating at that point right now. So
you go ahead and keep marinating. We'll move on. So let's start talking about about Hampton, right? So that was you all getting into art, and the other part of our topic this evening is about Hampton. So I want to hear about the arc of your experiences making art on the Hampton National Historic Site. And, I know from some conversations with our guests that things have changed over time. about those experiences. But Vernon, could you start us off, and then we'll hear from Sherri on this.
Yeah, I think my thoughts about the experience has changed over time too, especially recently. I look every opportunity I can find for every opportunity I can to make art. As a teacher, you don't find those opportunities often because you're very busy teaching it. So any chance that you get to make art, you jump at it to be unapologetic about it. So when and Baltimore County Public Schools does that very well, and luckily we get to partner with places like the Hampton Mansion to have those opportunities. It's a beautiful space, beautiful grounds, and there's just so much to see. So I enjoy those experiences. The natural beauty of the land, the structures are amazing, and it's very easy to interpret it on face value.
Okay.
I think over time the experience has changed for me because I learned a little bit more about the place, about the time, and it made me question what was life like in the 1790s and beyond on that land, on that beautiful piece of land. Where was the evidence of life of the enslaved or the indentured folks who were there?
Wow.
And I started digging. I remember the Sun paper doing an article about this maybe about 10 years ago, and how there's very little evidence of the enslaved past, of that past. But there's plenty of tea sets and plenty of other artifacts, but there's very little left. But what is there, and I found that out at one of the last tours, was what was saved was the slave collar, a couple of slave collars and the chains and things like that. But everything else, the clothing, the other objects that were used by those who were not part of the family who owned the land and the house and the house, that was not there anymore. So it's kind of a missing piece. And I think as an artist, we want to question those things. We want to make sure we fill in the pieces of and have the whole story of the Hampton plantation, not just the part that doesn't that sounds good, that looks good. We want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we want to see it. So go ahead.
I'm sorry, Vernon. You're talking about the slave collar. There's actually a portrait, painting.
Yeah, that's a painting I did. That was the last painting I did this past summer, and of course that just didn't happen. In my own personal journey and learning about the full story and not just a single story that was given to me, this kind of naturally happened for me. So I wanted to show the beauty of that magnolia tree and the echinata plants, but I also looked at the slave collar that was there on the property and wanted to fuse that with it. And it does make you question your role as an educator, as an art educator, and what kind of stories are we telling about art history and history in general as we expose our students to places and spaces and artists. So it just reminds me that as an art educator, our lives are comprised of many overlapping stories, and that our students need those stories in order to have their own authentic voice. And those missing pieces, to me, are negligent and devaluing, and that's where I stand right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Thank you, Vernon, for sharing that. And I've heard Vernon talk about the slave collar piece that he painted, and that's why definitely wanted to share that out with a larger audience. So thank you for recounting that. Sherri, how about you? And you have had some conversations on this as well, but how have your experiences
This is one of my favorite topics. So what I find really interesting is Vernon and I talk a lot. I don't know if we've ever talked about Hampton, which I think is really
no, we haven't.
Weird. And
the real talk
I think
has
there's
brought
literally
you together.
every other thing we've talked about, but I don't think we've talked about this experience, and I don't think we've even talked about some of the changes that we've made to the program together. And so so it's kind of interesting, like I don't think we've had that conversation together. So it's really great to hear sort of his view. This is, the partnership between Baltimore County and Hampton. It really came out of a partnership with the Hampton Historic Group, which is a group of people that are volunteers that really work to connect the community with the story of Hampton, and they work tangentially to the National Park Service, and so they're the ones who really brought the art teachers to the site. And so one of the things that when I first learned about it, I was teaching, and there was a lot of push to bring students to the site to make art, and I had a really hard time with it because I was teaching pretty low-income students in Southeast Baltimore County, and I just couldn't quite figure out how taking them to see this big, beautiful house, like what good was I doing? Like I couldn't figure out like what it was, and I just couldn't figure it out. And I would go and I enjoyed it, but I couldn't. It was just something, I was missing something, and I didn't have a full history of it. I didn't understand the place. I thought it was really strange that I'd grown up in Baltimore County and never heard of it. Like the whole thing was just really like weird to me. I needed to know more. So I really kind of didn't engage, right? Like that was my place of it for a long time, is I just didn't engage with it. I was like, I didn't know about it.
Right.
And then when I came into my position now, there was this longstanding tradition of these painting workshops, that had gone on, and these art shows that, rewarded. They had like awards for teacher work and student work, so they had these structures in place, and I just wasn't sure about it. I don't know. It's just something about it was missing, and I just was like, what is this? And then I started to notice, like, we would do art shows. We do art shows all the time. We have huge turnouts of families. And when I started to look at who would come to the receptions at Hampton Mansion, it was never our students of color.
Okay.
And I was like, what is that? But I was like, well, just, and then I know like some of the signage really changed, and I don't know the year. I was trying to look for this. They did a lot of work there at Hampton that really to bring in more of the context of the lower farm, which is where the slave quarters are. And I don't know exactly when a lot of signage work changed over there. And originally, like when I would go over, it would just say like servants' quarters.
Wow.
And then you would go in, and then I was like, wait a second, are these servants' quarters or these slave quarters? Like, I was just constantly finding myself very confused. And a lot of that has changed in the last probably 5-10 years, in terms of like things now are more appropriately marked. But I just, and there was like a move to bring in more educational resources. But there just were these holes. There was holes because people weren't talking about the whole of the history, and that's, I think, what Vernon's getting to, and then so for me, kind of thinking about like, what is the purpose of this situation? We can go sit beautiful places and paint beautiful things anywhere, but why are we here?
Right.
And that was just the thing I kept coming back to.
But Sherri, you make a good point, which is something that it's very typical in a lot of histories of, we are going to use the term here, say minorities, right? Or other people say, the global majority, but it's a deliberate erasure of history. And it's a deliberate rewriting of the history. So it's not that you were confused, it's the fact that powers that be wanted to call them servants because they wanted to deny that history and not honoring the fact that they were slave quarters. So there's a deliberateness to a lot of these things that happen. And then later on, people, they start getting pushback and people force the change. So what I'm just trying to say is the fact that it's not so much, I'm happy that we have educators like you who are thinking like, what the heck is going on? But it's also a very good example of, which has happened with our indigenous people. This country, it's the erasure of saying they never existed, therefore we're going to call it something else. And that's very common in the history of this country, unfortunately, where just one or two words totally changes the trajectory of an entire history of a people. You know?
Yeah, I agree. It's deliberate, it's intentional, but it continues if it goes unchallenged.
Correct.
And I think that's our role as educators. We have to step up and ask those questions, and encourage our students to inquire, to ask questions.
Right.
And then figure out meaning for themselves. But also have the courage to enter these spaces which could make them feel uncomfortable.
Right.
But if they're given the right context, I think our students are ready to understand the true history, and fill in the gaps with the things that were not originally told about these historical places in general.
Right.
I think something that made me kind of shift and re-engage with it, you know, because it was kind of this like, I don't know, we'll just see where this goes. When I realized that, you know, the property that the Ridgeleys originally owned went all the way up to like Owings Mills. It went all the way up to the Pennsylvania line. It went down into Baltimore City. And then I realized the number of our schools and students who live on this land, this is their history. And I was like, so then it was like, for me to disengage was to deny that, right? To deny that story was to keep whole, right? And it was like, and there was, you know, and there was like some construction going on one year, and it was sort of, we ended up needing to move the show to the farm, and it had always been held up closer to the mansion. And it was a great opportunity to talk about a totally different side of and focus of it. And then it made me really realize, though, how little our families, our teachers, our students were really prepared to talk about that, or had, you know, just really even understood what was going on. You know, like the house where we were holding those shows was the overseer's house. You know, you know what I mean? Like it's, you know, like that's a pretty powerful thing, you know. And so, you know, and then we shifted and started doing like contextual tours with the painting workshops. And I don't know, Vernon, if you were there for some of those or not. And that's what I can't remember. If we were like, and I don't know that
at least one.
Maybe, yeah. And they, you know, and because it was just this thing is like, what is it to paint? And now this is like, so I had an opportunity last year. I went down to Charleston, and there was this, the Gibbs Museum had done this show many years ago, The Landscape of Slavery. And it was about sort of like, how did you paint the South? You know, like, how did you paint up during that time? After, like, what was it? And I was always really wondering, what is it to paint beautiful places with really, like, you know, challenged past, and with a lot of, like, what is that? You know, not that, like, what, and that's just something that but I think instead of having a resolution, like, that's the question, right? Like, that's fun art, like, that's not, I don't know if fun's the right word, but that's the thing, like, that's the way, that's why we go there as artists, right? Is like, what is it to be surrounded by this, like, really incredible structures that we, you know, right in our backyards, and to know that the reason that house is there is because it was built by enslaved people. Right. You know, the reason we have, you know, a lot of the major developments were because of the, you know, the genius of the people that were also enslaved. You know, they were there for their skills, and that's why we have a lot of those things. And so it's just a much richer story. And it was one that, like, the more I learned about it, the more interested I became. Right. And I started really from a place of, like, I don't know about this.
You started questioning. Like, you know, Vernon said, you have to start questioning in order to make that change.
Right. And you stayed engaged, right? We put up a comment earlier. You didn't disengage, you know, you kind of, that discomfort, right? You kind of put through that and found some deeper meaning. Right?
Yeah.
It reminds me, I grew up in the earlier part of my life in Virginia and in Richmond. And I remember growing up as a child in elementary school, we would always visit Monticello, or Monticello, however you say, I call it Monticello, you know, the home of Thomas Jefferson. And when I reflect on it, never ever did I hear them talking about him being a slave master or slave or nothing. You know, it was just this amazing place that he built and all of this serenity around him. And just now, I'm sure if I go back, I would take my children, it's a totally different story. But that was like 30 some years ago, you know. So everything you talk about is just the evolution of how it takes not just historians, you two are art teachers, and you're giving that almost like civic action piece to bring out the truth, but you're doing it in a different way. You're doing it artistically.
But it's also like one of the things that I love is like, the Ridgeleys picked that piece of land because it's amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has the most incredible views. Like there's like all of that. Like, so there's something about being on that land that is just really, it's just a great and like space, So, and I think that's something that, why do we keep going back there for these different kinds of events? It's like, because there is something really special about the physical space,
right?
And
so
yeah, I agree.
We have pictures, and we'd love for you two to speak about these pictures about, the Hampton Plantation, you taking students, and you spoke about students. And here's a really good picture because you have the two, age groups. You have older, I'm assuming they're high school students.
There's
elementary.
So this was part of the big shift that we made in the programming this was just last year. And so this was an experience where we had 3 different artists working with 3 different Park Service guides on these and students went through these experiences, different experiences on site. And this was a K through 12 open opportunity for schools. So they were mixed in groups they were mixed levels to some extent.
Okay.
And so you have kindergartners working with high schoolers and, doing different.
Oh, very cool.
And because one of the things that I was really interested in was kind of like, I just think it's really good when we break down some barriers, around like how we learn and where we learn. And so what you see on the one image is Carol Cook, who was the artist, and he was doing a cyanotype workshop, looking at how we took pictures in sort of the heyday of Hampton. And this might have been a method, that the using botanical things and with treated paper. And, so they were working with the horticulturist from Hampton and learning about some of that and like some of the science behind that. And I think the other image, they were working with an artist, Gretchen Manaville, who has like a city planning and architecture background. And they were learning about some of the structures of the buildings because they're quite impressive as well. So that's what you're seeing in these images. This was a really big shift. Before, the students kind of came either on a science or a social studies field trip, or maybe they did like a painting workshop. But this was a big shift to kind of integrate the history with the art making.
Right.
And part of it was pre-work that teachers did with students around specifically looking at the history of Hampton Mansion and looking specifically at slavery. And that's the part of the beer that we worked on together was some of that, the resources for teachers to work with our students, our young elementary students, as well as our high school students, to have some background. Because that's one of the things I realized our teachers, and this is so many structures. Why? But they didn't know where to put it into their curriculum. They didn't know like how to have the conversation. And so it was like, well, let's start by having the conversation.
Correct.
So that was because it was a piece of it that it kept getting left out. I would see it left out in the student work. I was, just kept getting left out.
Right.
And so this was, I'm really sad we don't get to get year 2 this year of it. Because I think, like year 2 tells you something else. Like year 1 is just like you celebrate that you did it, and year 2, you start to, okay, what are we doing with this? So hopefully we get to year 2 next year.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you have other images of the other artist, Ada Pinkston, that we work with too.
So we have this one of the students actually doing art.
Yeah, so this was actually with Ada Pinkston, and this was we were talking about how the removal of artifacts and histories, and so this was down at the farm, and one of the things Ada was working with was how we don't have images of who lived down here, but there's so many portraits of the people that lived in the mansion.
Right.
So using sort of the traditional kind of idea of silhouettes that were of that time. And sort of envisioning who could have lived here. And so it was a lot of talking about like the experience of it. And then for our younger kids, one of the things we did was talking about like responding to the way it felt to stand in the wind, or what would it feel like. And so they were kind of doing more experimental painting, just talking about like kind of trying to capture their feelings of being in that space. And so they were kind of working hand in hand, painting on fabric and making sort of these kind of ethereal images of what people could have looked like at that time. And that was what we were looking at. And that's what you see here. And so here you see, these are students, what we did is the buses were arranged by feeder patterns. So these are students from, I think, Lansdowne High, and I think, or close to it, not true feeder patterns, but I think maybe they might have been, I think that might have been, I don't know if that's Riverview or Baltimore Highlands, I'm not sure. But so we had, kids coming from all over Baltimore County that participated. I think we had about 200 kids that day.
Right.
I don't know.
So the question came to mind is, like in social studies, we don't like to do the role playing. Of course. Right. How do you play into their teaching students to paint something of, who do you think lived here? Or what did they look like? Or how do you create it where it's not offensive or it doesn't come off as quote unquote role playing?
Well, I think one of the things that Ada was talking about as she led the workshop was there were some photos of people from Hampton who were enslaved, and also some other photos. She worked a lot with the Maryland Historical Society to get some different resources to share. But they also talked a lot about why there might not be images of people. And that was the conversation with the students, is that there aren't images of who lived here. So why do we think that? And that was really what a lot of it was about. It wasn't so much about capturing a specific, there was no likeness to capture. And so, and it was just sort of like honoring that it was a sort of what came out of it was honoring, that people lived there and worked there. In a space where there's almost no portraiture in that area, and there's so much portraiture up on the other side. So, so it's kind of that sort of piece, and the pieces were then displayed together on these large fabric that were outside and inside of the farmhouse in that area. It was very organic, and it was kind of like we didn't know quite exactly where it was going, and so, but that's one of the thing about working with artists is that they come to the space, they worked with whoever their partner park ranger was to build that workshop, and then I was sort of like the thread of getting them together and the one who writes the bus contracts. But that was a lot of it, because it was, it was like, let's make sure because we have these incredible resources of these national parks rangers. Like if we're struggling to tell the history, let's bring them in, and let's let the artist do the art and the historian do the history, and then let's let the students make something of this experience. And that was really, that's where I am now, is like, let's give everybody all the pieces.
Right.
And
I
then
think and the challenge is there's this whole master narrative. The challenge is filling in those empty pieces. And that's where, of course, our students can use their imagination with given the history, even though it's incomplete, to try to fill in those gaps and ask those questions with our help. So, but it is challenging to do that.
So, I'm sure it'd be quite a challenge, especially on such a sensitive topic and such a heavy topic. But Vernon, we have this picture of you, which I think is a great picture. So when you're there, first of all, I'd love for you to explain this to us. But my question to you though is, are you painting also while the students are also painting? And does that kind of help students feed off of your energy? How does that work?
No, actually, this was just art teachers throughout the Baltimore County.
I see.
So what I loved about the workshops, this was one of the early ones that was kind of led by teachers for teachers. So this was kind of a celebration of the end of the school year, because it was the week after school let out, but also the beginning of summer. So it was an exciting time to make something uninterrupted. And just to be free to make something. It was raining that day, so I have the umbrella set up.
I can see that, right?
Over it. So it's just nice to be out and to paint uninterrupted in the quietness. I was right above the, I think it was the French Gardens, right above those gardens, painting that. So I think the experience to paint with kids would be fantastic, though.
Right.
But those times are far and few in between. You could get a little bit of time in a classroom to do that, but it would be a great experience to do that alongside students.
Yeah, that would be cool. I'm going to show one last picture. So I really like this picture a lot. You know, kids enjoy art a lot more than we give them credit, I think. So speak about this one. It looks like they're admiring artwork that was done at the Hampton Plantation.
Yeah, so what we did, so the students who participated last year, then we did like a pop-up show. And so all the work that was made that day was then immediately like installed and then hung, and then families were invited the next day. And so this is the next day when they were there with their parents. And so this was the first time. The art show used to be really pretty consolidated to one area. And this was, now the art show was everywhere. Nice. And so so it was really, and it was really neat. This, you know, these are just some of the students coming back on that Saturday to look at their work. And it was really, this was such a unique experience. Most of them had never done anything like cyanotype printing. So it was really, and also like you could kind of see in the one picture, Carol also was in wearing like period clothing. Like, you know, like, so, you know, I mean, like you really got into it. So the three artists that we worked with last year were incredible in their commitment to really like understanding and learning about what they were doing. Which was neat.
Wow. That's very powerful.
Yes, agreed.
Very powerful indeed. Yes. So.
So I guess keeping with, kind of goes back to the theme we talked about earlier with this erasure, you know, the deliberate erasure of just complete lives, right? The lives of the enslaved. And you all both spoke about this earlier. So question, and we phrase it as how do you or how can you, you know, going forward, how do you center Black students in art making at Hampton? And this second part of the question, I admit, I just heard this a couple of days ago. And it kind of, you know, it wasn't about making art, but it was about, you know, taking the pain that we know students can experience as being Black students in a public school system. But how do you take, how can students create art from that pain and or the pain of their ancestors, like the ancestors that were enslaved on the plantation? So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I think in the history of art education, the narrative of art education, there has only been a single entry into it for people of color, because the narrative is fixed, as I said before. So we have to fill in the gaps as we in spaces like this. I think with our students, I think from the painful past can come stories of perseverance, survival, triumph, and inspiration. And I think that's a way we can get our students to become centered in their art making experience at the Hampton. And there's so much room for the silenced voices and the unheard voices from history, and also just to keep in mind to give the Hampton Plantation a frame of reference, because that plantation was not the only one in this country, and what happened there happened everywhere. So we do have an idea of what kind of things happen, what the people were, how they lived, how they were treated, just by looking at other places around it.
Thank you, Vernon, for that. Appreciate that. Sherri, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the things that I'm remembering back to some conversations I had with some students when we were there last year was that you have a right to be there. Right, that you like this is all of your space. This is a national park site. Like you belong. This, you know, and I think that was one of the first things that struck me is that, and you know, and also just like letting students feel the way they feel, you know, about wherever they are, you know, and just sort of like, and then giving them a way to process it. So, because what I always thought was really tough is that, you know, because I know that when they shifted some of the tours, is like, what is it to go on a school sanctioned trip to slave quarters as a Black student? I don't know. You know, that's not my experience, but what is that? And if that trip doesn't provide you a way to process that, through art making. And I would say art making is the right way because there's not a wrong, it's not a quiz. You're not, there's something, I don't know, there can be something anonymous about the way you might make art, personal or private. But I thought it was really important to let kids see all of the things, the innovations of the space, the grandeur of the space, the hidden histories of the space, all of that, and let them process it through art making. And then, and then start to build their own conclusions about the value of it. So, I mean, I think that, and like this, the story of slavery is the story of why Hampton got to be as prominent as it is. I mean, so you cannot talk about Hampton without talking about slavery.
Correct.
Like that. And for a long time, I think people did not talk about slavery with it, and it's like, but you can't. There's no way, there's no appropriate way to talk about that space without
it. I'll go ahead, Abir.
No, I think Vernon was going to say something.
But also, as educators and art educators in this case, we have to be prepared to respond to those needs of our students entering these spaces by becoming experts in what we do, our discipline, and also knowing the meaning and the histories of our content areas. And that'll help us kind of help our students navigate through these could be uncomfortable spaces.
So there was a student work that was made. There's like, there was a student work made. This was several years ago, and it was something about the benevolent slaveholder. It was like part of it, right? And like that narrative. And I thought a lot about the student sitting next to the student making that work. And I don't know either of the students, but I remember seeing the artwork. And that was when I was really like, we've got to change this, because like this is a student who's the one student who made the piece was in response to resources and things that had been provided for them. They weren't really able to unpack their own experience and history. They've been handed a narrative and they perpetuated the narrative, and what is it for every kid around them? I don't know, so that was something that was sort of where I wanted to, rethink. And that's where we brought in more of the Park Service people with some of that, because it was, that it was too easy to perpetuate narratives that were incomplete.
Right. It is a mind shift and a mindset, as stated earlier, but I think people also have to be willing to accept that history and in order to work on changing it. Because you going from not having anything mentioned that it was a plantation to now saying that it's a plantation. I mean, there's a reason there I would call a cover up. There's a reason you're denying that that's what it was. And of course, the reason being whatever they want it to be. But it takes a lot for people to admit their truths and go about and using art or whatever to fix it. And to fill in, to change that narrative, because changing a narrative is extremely powerful. Extremely powerful.
Right. So, I guess when I listen to what was shared, and something I do often, like I'll go back, I'll look at an episode, I'll, a beer with someone, letting things marinate. So I do that quite a bit. And just listening to me, just to talk about that whole arc of experiences. And what we just ended with was this way to push forward. Right. In the beginning, this erasure, this denial that there was even an existence of an enslaved people on that property, but you saw the beauty of the property. And Sherri, you pointed out, how did it get that way?
Right.
And then, Vernon spoke to it. I noticed he talked about knowing the history of our content areas. And we had a question earlier about art cutting across content areas. So I think we're talking in this specific example about Hampton, about making art. But like Vernon pointed out, as educators, we have to know the history of what we're teaching, what we're putting in front of students, and really have the awareness of what that can mean to students, and then giving them that space, like Sherri is saying, to process and persevere, as Vernon said. To me, this is like an educator's workshop. I guess what I'm getting at. Hopefully folks can sit here, replay this episode and get into it like I'm have gotten into it and will later as well. So but
Right.
hopefully you all can see why these are two of my favorites. So.
I think one last point before we start wrapping up, but it's interesting that people want to deny that, you know, any type of plantation was a plantation. But if you go into their records, everything was written down from the moment they bought people, from the moment that they sold them. Like everything is recorded. And my husband and I have these conversations, and I sit there and I'm like, it baffles me that these people participated in such an institution, but kept records. And so you can deny as much as you want, but the records are kept for a reason. Like imagine no records being kept. People could have denied it their entire life, you know, but it's just that, you know, that karma of having those records prove this is exactly what went on. And the fact that these people took meticulous notes to who they had and what they did with those, you know, human bodies is just, I think, fascinating to me, but mind-boggling. Just mind-boggling. So again,
that's probably another topic for another show.
Right? I think so. So we are very fortunate and happy to have both of you on the show. We can talk forever, but we always like to end our show with two very, very important questions. So the first question that we would like to ask both of you is, which artist would you have perform an album about your life and why? And what would the album cover art and title be?
Oh gosh.
Vern's like, oh gosh.
That was harder than I thought.
Everybody says that.
I thought about this question looking at previous podcasts. I was thinking about this question every time. But it came to me this morning. I was thinking about a time where I was it was 1979, okay. And I would find myself sitting with my Earth, Wind and Fire, my father's Earth, Wind and Fire album, all in all, and just listening to it from the entire vinyl over and over and over again, knowing every single word on that album. So it would definitely be Earth, Wind and Fire with Maurice White, of course.
Absolutely.
But the title I thought about was on the previous album in 1973. Keep Your Head to the Sky. The album was Head to the Sky, so I would think I love a couple of lines in that song. Purpose is the reality. Purpose to live is reality. So that would be the title of the album.
Nice. And
the cover art.
Okay. So you're saying the artist would be Earth, Wind and Fire?
Yeah.
Okay.
They will perform the album.
Okay.
I'm going to just stick with the cover art. I'm going to keep their cover art for All in All in 1979. That's amazing. It was the pyramids and the people. So I love album art. Yes. Keith Lewis agrees with you. He says, great song.
Yes, you've been endorsed by Keith.
Yes, Keith always comes in at the end and gives us his endorsement. So we're good for the show. How about you, Sherri?
I think mine. So mine actually came to me pretty quickly, and then I was like, just been doubting it, and then I've like shared it with people, like, oh yeah, that's right, that's the right thing. And I was like, okay. So like my husband was like, what would you do? And he came up with the same one. So I think I'm on the right track. But it would be probably the B-52s, and the album art would be Nick Cave, who actually, and I promise I'm not sucking up, is a Chicago-based artist.
Doug is never ever. Every show has a Chicago connection. I'm sorry, Douglas. I win.
Yeah, but he's a performance artist, and he makes all this really crazy stuff out of found objects and fibers and all of these things. And I would not have a title on it because I would just have some really amazing kind of artwork in the front that would make you want to, like, wonder what's going on.
An aura of mystery.
Yes, yeah.
You see, artists never answer the questions fully.
I can tell. Yes, that's the mystique.
It's funny because the second part we put in, if you look at the other episodes, the album cover art was especially for you all.
Yes.
And you all did some type of whatever you all were doing over there.
Right.
Very nice.
Yeah.
All right. So before we go, back by popular demand after a week hiatus, my popular demand, if no one else's. We do have the world famous 4x4 challenge. So I see Vernon's looking forward to it. So we'll give some choice, right? I know we're big on choice in our classroom. So We have, we like to honor hip hop in the space. So we have our graffiti art, our DJing, our breaking, our B-boying and B-girling, and MCing. So we're going to ask if you can just name one artist from each of those pillars. And if you all want to team up to cover 4, if you want to do 4 on your own, we'll leave it up to you on how you all want to tackle the challenge.
Hold on.
All right.
So I have to come. I tell you four in each of the categories. I tell you
one of each.
Just one of each. One of each. So it's kind of a misnomer. Yes, like one of each.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do I get to see? Are you going to put the categories back?
There you go.
Yeah, the categories are there for you. Look at Sherri, so studious. She's so I don't know if you all want to team up. You want to do 4 on your own. Like Sherri is gearing up.
I think we should co-do this one.
Okay.
For graffiti art, I don't know a whole lot of graffiti artists, but I think the one that was most impressive to me was Jean-Michel Basquiat.
It's like the 3rd time somebody's mentioned him.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty bad with people's names. So that's gonna be a tough one. But like I can picture his face. The DJ I'm thinking of that would do the parties in Brooklyn in like the early 80s. And I cannot remember his name. So that's a lose.
How many DJs there were in Brooklyn in the 80s? Sherri?
I know. But
There's
one guy, and he I don't know. There's someone I'm thinking of.
Well, I can help a little bit with that.
I love this. Is like the most comical one we've had so far. Sorry, I love it.
All right, I
want the audience to see Sherri taking notes. Okay, I got it back now. There you go.
Trying to think.
She's doodling. I know what she's doing there. I know her well. She's activating her brain. I know that. Right.
What do you got, Vernon?
I do. See, it's gonna. This isn't making me angry now because Run DMC and not Jam Master J.
That's who I'm thinking of. Jam Master J. That's who I was thinking of. Okay.
Okay. So Jam Master J is gonna be DJ. You got Basquiat as your graffiti artist.
Yes.
All right. Well, the third one.
Are you going with Run DMC as your MCs, or you got different MCs?
No. Actually, I was watching an old episode of I think it was Saturday Night. I'm gonna go with Mos Def.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
Yassine Bey.
Freestyle.
Yassine Bey.
Yeah.
Yes, always a good choice. Fine
And
choice.
for B-boys, I think anybody who has the skill to B-boy or B-girl wins.
Okay.
Love it. Love it.
Nice save, Vernon.
Very nice. Very nice. Great teamwork there.
Yes.
We went from this mysterious Brooklyn DJ in the 80s.
I know, like what?
Listed about 100 people.
And again, you have the stamp of approval from Mr.
And there
Keith
you go.
Lewis.
There's Keith Lewis. Right?
And Mr. George Miller was giving Keith a
we got some fraternity love going on here, which is good. We like to bring people together in the space. We
do.
Yes.
So I think we're done with our 4x4, Douglas? Or do
we
they have one more?
Thank you. Challenge met.
Very good. Well done.
That was painful.
Yeah.
That's our job, is to make it end painfully for you.
Right.
We would love to thank you two. We can't thank you enough, and we always love being in your space because I think you two are amazing educators, amazing people, amazing artists. I love working, collaborating with you too. I can go on and on and on forever. Really quick, George Miller says Tribe Called Quest. Yes, they've been mentioned before.
They have their favorite, of course.
Yes. And Keith says, Keith, okay.
Right.
Keith is like the ghostwriter of the show. So
I'm going to give some love to Lauryn Hill while we're at it.
Yeah, thank you. She's
Vernon.
never been mentioned.
I'm not sure if she was mentioned on the ladies' first episode.
She wasn't.
Thank you, Vernon.
Yes.
Because
I made a thread if nobody mentioned Queen Latifah, they did. But Lauryn Hill, thank you.
Yes.
Vernon, you're up there, brother, with my favorite people. Finally.
I'm a little disappointed you didn't mention a certain group that we've been talking about here recently. They've made a resurgence due to OPP.
Oh. Naughty by nature.
So a little ridiculous inside joke for Sherri and me.
I was okay. First, I started with the canoes, and now
Right.
Naughty by nature.
So Sherri, you got to cover me on this. There's actually, acronyms galore, and our employer has an acronym called the Office Progress Plan.
Oh.
And when they told us that, Sherri, do we actually have to work on something called the OPP?
You done with OPP? There you go. Yeah, you know me.
Yeah. So that's I can't go to those meetings without that anymore. And I was like, I can't. They need a new acronym.
They do.
I love it. Yeah. So again, if you have any questions, please send us your comments at Real Talk Our Space. If you want to give comments to our guests, please do. And you can always follow us on YouTube, Real Talk Our Space. And if you would like to watch the amazing people again, it will be downloaded there. Sherri and Vernon, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you both very much. Really appreciate you all. Thank you.
We do. So have a good night.
All right.
You too.
Good night. So we do have another, Jen Stowe has another endorsement for I agree. Yes,
one of the best albums.
multi Grammy Award winning.
I agree. She's
outstanding.
She's wonder bar, as they say.
Yes. So that was rich.
I love it, and that's your people. You're so you're very welcome, Mr. Miller. You're welcome anytime in this space.
Yes. Please return.
It's a family affair, as Mary J would say. Yes.
Outstanding. Yes, or slide in the family stone, right? Whoever's family affair you. Yes. So wonderful time, absolutely. So next week we're going to continue with Maryland Stories. We have a special guest, Brother Edward Handy. Yes, of some relation. He is my uncle, and be glad to have him here with us. And our topic will be Black Catholics. So as you can see from his name, he is a Franciscan friar. Wow. He is a brother, a Catholic friar, if you will. So going to get a little bit about the history of Black Catholics in Baltimore specifically, and talk really quite a bit about his experiences. He'll be celebrating his 60th year jubilee next year in the order. So definitely has some stories that he can share with us. So we're looking forward to that.
That's exciting. And I've told the story before that I never knew there were Black Catholics until I moved to Maryland. I guess that's a stereotype that you have, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'm excited, and tune in next week as we talk to Doug's
Brother
cousin. I'm sorry, uncle.
Uncle, yes.
Yes. Keith says he can't wait for that. Neither can we.
Excellent.
All right.
Yes.
So have a good night, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
Yep. Take care, everyone.
All right.
Have a good night.
Bye. Bye.